consider is the queen. As I said before, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. The queen can travel in any direction as many squares that are open. Let's watch how both sides get their queen to the middle of the board and just watch how that queen can get around. White moves and black, and here comes white's queen out, and black's. White moves again, and so does black. White moved his pawn out, attacking black's queen. Let's see what black does. And black moved to the side of the board, and you can see that there is an opening here between the queen and the white king. You see, on that diagonal? So right now, black's queen is attacking white's king. At that point, black has to announce to white, check. At that point, it's up to it's up to white to get out of check. And he can do that a number of ways. He could capture that piece, he could move his king, or he could interpose a piece. For instance, pushing the pawn up to here would block the queen off, you see? Let's see what he does. And he decided to move his knight out. That develops the knight. It also blocks off the queen. And so black moves his queen, and so does white, and white captures the pawn. So let's go back to square one, and we'll consider the next piece. Now the next piece is the king. The king is the object of the game. In other words, the object is to place your opponent's king under attack. That's called check. When the king can't escape the attack, that's called checkmate, and the game is over. Let's watch now as both sides move their king out and about. The kings move one square in any direction. And white moves out his pawn, and so does black. Here comes the white king, and the black king. And white just moved his king in a diagonal, you see. And black does the same. He moved his king at a diagonal from here to there. And white moves again. Now you notice that black can't move to this square because it's right next to the king. The kings never get right next to each other. You see, that would be moving into check. And you can't move into check. That's against the rules. The same thing with this square here, which is under attack by that pawn. Even if the king wasn't there, the black king couldn't move to that square because it's under attack by that pawn. Let's see what they do. And it looks like black is heading for home. And so is white. But look what white did. He moved his king at a diagonal from that pawn. Now that's moving into check. You can't do that. So at this point, black would tell white, you've just made an illegal move. You'll have to take that move back and move it somewhere else. And so white does. He moves his king back and then moves it to a legal square. Just like that. And black moves. And so does white. Now black is safely home. And so is white. So let's go back to square one, and we'll consider the next step. And here we are at square one. The next thing to consider is a move called castling. Now castling is a way to get your king towards the corner. By doing that, you provide the king with much more protection. There are certain rules to castling. For instance, you can't have moved your rook. If you did, you can't castle on that side. If you move your king, well, you can't castle on either side. Let's watch how both players move their pieces out of the way and then castle. Here white moves up his pawn, and so does black. white moves out his bishop, and so does black. And white moves out his knight. Now you notice there are no pieces between the rook and the king. And white has not moved his king, and he has not moved his rook. So on his next turn, he'll be able to castle. And black moves out his knight. So now white can castle, and what he does to castle is to move his king 2 squares, and he puts the rook on the other side, just like that. Now let's watch how black castles, except he's going to castle on his queen side. Black moves his pawn out to make room for the bishop, and white moves. Black brings out his bishop, and white moves again. And black moves his queen out of the way. Now you can see there are no pieces between the black king and the black rook on the queen side. Black hasn't moved his king, and he hasn't moved his rook. So on his next turn, he'll be able to castle. And white moves out his bishop. So now black castles. He moves his king 2 squares, and then puts the rook on the other side. Just like that. And both kings are towards the corner and into a little better protected area. Now you notice that when you castle on the king's side, there is 1 square in the corner. And when you castle on the queen's side, there are 2 squares. That's because the queen is there, you see. There's 3 pieces between the king and the rook on the queen's side. Now there are some rules regarding castling. Let's go back to square one, and I'll set up a couple situations where white cannot castle. Now in this situation, black's bishop is attacking this square. Even though white has not moved his king, and he hasn't moved his rook, and there are no pieces in between, he still cannot castle. The reason is because, as I said, the bishop is attacking this square. If white were to castle, he would be moving his king onto that square. He would be in check. And that's against the rules. You can't move into check. Now here's another situation. Now this time, black's bishop is attacking this square here. So you see, if white was to castle, he would be passing through that square that's under attack by the bishop. And that's against the rules. You can't pass through check, you can't castle into check, and you can't castle when you're in check. In other words, you can't castle to get out of check. So let's go back to square one. So here we are back at square one. Now in review, let's discuss how the pieces move. The pawns, as I say, 1 square or 2 squares on their opening move, and then 1 square forward after that. The knights can jump over pieces, and they move up 2 squares in at right angles 1 square. The bishops travel diagonally. The queen can go any direction, any number of squares. And the king can move 1 square in any direction. Now there are point values assigned to the pieces that can give you a general idea as to who has more strength. When you add up the totals of the pieces and pawns you've won and compare that to your opponent, you can get a pretty good idea who's ahead. Now the queen is 9 points. As I said, the most powerful piece on the board. Next, the rook. The rook is 5 points. After that, the knights and the bishops are 3 points apiece. The king is just 1 point. And each pawn is also 1 point. You can be behind a point or two and still have a good game. Much depends on the position of the pieces and exactly what's going on in the game. at this point, what I'd like to do is to offer some basic strategy. It's often said that if you castle early, that's a good idea. Another thing to do is to develop your pieces towards the middle of the board and contest the middle of the board. See, when the pieces are there, they have pretty good range. Another good piece of advice is to develop the knights before the bishops. So let's watch now how both sides develop their pieces in castle. White moves his pawn out, and black does the same. White moves out his bishop, and black does the same. White moves out his knight, and black moves out his knight. Now you notice that both sides have their pieces out of the way on the king's side, so now they'll be able to castle. White moves his king over 2 squares and puts the rook on the other side. And black moves his king over 2 squares and puts his rook on the other side. And white brings out his other knight, and so does black. White moves his queen over, and black does this, moves his rook over, and white moves his king into the corner, and black does the same. Are you beginning to get the idea? Let's go back to square one. And here we are back at square one. Now that's the end of part one. I hope that it gives you a good foundation for a strong chess game. In fact, I hope that one of you out there becomes a chess champion.